your views on market performance today?
Well, it's good to be here. Well, the market, as you've seen, is actually shown very positive returns, especially with sentiments of local investors coming back on board strongly in the stock market, as opposed to the way the trend had been in 2009 and late 2008. So we've seen positive trends from the local investors.
All right, just talk to us about that phenomenon, the fact that we're beginning to see interest rising from local investors, foreign investors who constitute about 70% of 12 listed
Yes.
stock on the NSE. They're starting to sell in the midst of this upswing. Why is that?
Well, you have to look at it from their point of view. They came in when the market, when a lot of local investors were pulling out, and a lot of stocks were what you'd call cherry pickings, because the prices that were available at the market was actually a good point for them to come on board. And now that the prices are actually now moving upwards, most of the foreign investors are actually selling off, hence reaping from the benefits, the price difference from the time they came into the market and when they're exiting.
You know, foreigners are often credited with shoring up the equities market in Kenya. Can locals sustain those gains?
Well, in the long term, the locals will, because we've seen a lot of renewed interest, and the renewed interest has actually come out very strongly, irrespective of what is coming on board the August 4th referendum. There's still a lot of interest for the local investors, and we've seen that. And going forward, also with the opening up of the East Africa market, you see now there'll be much more. I know the Tanzanians are yet to come on board in terms of buying directly in the market, but we still have the wider market of Rwanda and Uganda. So you'd have much more interest now in the stock exchange.
All right, well, KCB provides some kind of prototype in terms of how the East African common market will work and how the harmonization of trading across bourses is going to work. Has there been any real indication of whether or not KCB is going to raise what it's hoping to raise and the kind of interest that it's hoping to generate from across the East African community?
Well, I'd say it's slightly a bit too early to tell, seeing that they launched the rights issue yesterday. There was some renewed activity of about maybe 900,000 shares trading, rights being traded at between a shilling and 15. But going forward, I'm seeing there will be a lot more interest also looking at KCB's presence within East Africa, that it has actually a foothold in each of the 5 countries at the most, and you would notice that most of it, the interest is being generated more or less between the Kenyan, Uganda, and the Tanzanians. They are yet to get much more data, but going forward, that's one thing we look forward to come next week.
All right, just still on that issue of cross-regional trade, we know that the NSE 20 has risen by 31% in the first 5 months of this year. With the harmonization of rules, is there going to be a preference maybe for the NSE versus the Ugandan bourse or the Tanzanian bourse? You know, is there any way to mitigate the competition?
Well, I would say you'd notice that would be the trend, because a lot of, between the three bourses, the NSE is the most active, most actively traded, has much more stocks on board. And you'd notice there'll always be a natural bias that now more and more investors from the neighboring East Africa community would more or less prefer now to invest directly in the NSE within the medium to short term, as they make plans to actually extend the stock exchange to incorporate, hopefully maybe incorporate and have just one major stock exchange as opposed to 3 separate or 4 separate stock exchanges. But in the meantime, yes, we tend to see there'll be a lot of renewed activity from East Africa in the Nairobi Stock Exchange.
All right, let's just talk about the state of the Kenyan economy. We got first quarter results coming through. Growth has slowed to 4.4%, and it's largely due to the cost of electricity and generating thermal power.
Yes. Well, yeah, within the period, irrespective of the long range that we've had, power was actually on the higher side. Generating electricity was on the higher side, owing to the independent power producers were actually running more on diesel generators, and this factored in on the high electricity bills. Then also you notice there's an issue of the consumers. They've actually slowed down in terms of their buying power, irrespective of the fact that inflation has gone down. In fact, the inflation rate, once it was revised, is about 3.1, 3.2. So meaning the cost of food has actually gone down. But the issue of electricity, which is a major factor when you're looking at consumer trends, is still on the higher side. But within the next coming months, the next quarter going forward, we'll notice a change, because going forward, you'd see there'll be a lot of renewed interest, because the key thing is, like, we are waiting for August 4th, which is the referendum date, and from there on we notice a lot of things will fall in place. But between now and then, there's still that like a wait and see approach from the consumers generally.